Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. My guest today is Bill Flynn from CatalystGrowthAdvisors.com, and we are going to be in for a really fun kind of conversation. And the conversation is going to start with, why do businesses go out of business? So let's bring Bill on. We'll start off with that question. Hey, Bill, how are you today?
Hey, Josh, how are you? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I think it's going to be fun for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm looking forward to it. I love doing these podcasts. I always get to talk to really interesting people along the way. So at your business, you focus on helping people stay in business and not go out of business, and
Yep.
then build a business that somebody else might want to own down the road. Am I correct?
Yep.
Okay. So why do businesses go out of business? Before, the obvious thing is they run out of cash. So let's get that off the table.
Yeah, but I think that's a consequence of other things, right? Usually.
Yeah, it's a result. It's not a purpose.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's start with the data. So there's two sets of data that I know of from the Department of Labor Statistics and then the Small Business Administration. And basically the data says the same thing, that we have about a 50% chance of lasting 5 years if you start a business. And then you have a 25% chance of lasting 15 and about a 16% chance of lasting 25.
Yeah.
So the longer you're in business, the less likely you are to stay in business. And obviously, if you want to flip the business or you're done and tired, that's one thing. But there are millions of businesses started on a regular basis, and I'm sure most of them are looking to last more than a few years, depending on what their goals are. So it's a sad story, and I like to say that you'd think that as you did something longer and longer, you'd get better and better at it. So the data should, the curve should be a different slope. You should probably go out of business early, but then eventually it should flatten out a little bit. But it doesn't. It sort of has this parabolic look to it. And what I've found, I've been studying business success mostly for the last 30 years, really intensely in the last 4 or 5. And I've found that there are 3 main reasons that I've come up with that businesses go out of business. And one is that there's a meaningful gap between what science knows and what business does. And we rely too much on conventional wisdom and intuition in our business, and we don't check it. And I think,
can you explain what do you mean by that?
Yeah, conventional wisdom is stuff like, hey, you know what? You have to give feedback to your employees. You should talk to your customers and ask them what they want. It's been proven that people don't like feedback, and feedback is a tool for growth, and the goal is growth. But feedback is often creates something called reactance, which is the brain's reaction to being told what to do. And a good example is these days with masks, right? A lot of people don't wear masks out in public or wherever because they were told to, and then they make up reasons after the fact: freedom, CO2, whatever, etc. So something like feedback, we've been told that you have to give feedback. And what I've learned is you don't actually have to give feedback. What you do is have to find ways to help people grow. So one of the guys I really like is this guy, Jeff Hunter, and he talks about feedback a lot. And he said, he talks about feedback as a way to help people understand the standard. Because there's a great saying by this guy, Ashley Goodall, who wrote a book recently with Marcus Buckingham, and he says, feedback is you talking about you in the presence of me.
I actually agree with that 100%. I hate performance reviews.
Yeah.
Hey, as I say, the most useless thing that you could possibly do in the business. And years ago, we came up with a thing we call performance coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm coaching you, I'm looking out in the future. But if I'm reviewing you, I'm looking at what happened in the past. And who cares about the past, really?
It can be instructive, but yes, you shouldn't spend a lot of time on it.
Well, that's not where you're going to get it's sort of like, are you familiar with appreciative inquiry?
Yes, a friend of mine is very deep in that.
Yeah, well, appreciative inquiry essentially says build on your strengths. Very simple, not hard. Well, if I'm
There you go.
reviewing you, there you are, right there. If I'm reviewing you, I'm not building on your strengths. I'm just looking at what we did in the past, which really doesn't really count a whole lot. Might be a little
Exactly.
bit intuitive, but if we're going out in the future and I'm coaching, big difference.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're hitting the nail on the head, which is, if you want people to grow, strengths is the most important. We get better when we get better at the things that we're good at.
Yeah,
And fixing weaknesses is only helping people not to fail, but not necessarily to excel.
right.
So I think that's what a lot of feedback is about. So I'll tell the quick Jeff Hunter story, and I'll get back to you in a second. So Jeff Hunter says, if you want people to get better, is the first thing you have to do is if you see something that they're not reaching the standard, then take them aside and say, remind them of the standard. Do you know what the standard is? Do you know what the standard is for running a meeting in this organization? Oh yes, it's this, and this. Okay, how do you think we did? And because this person ran the meeting. Well, we almost met it. Okay, where didn't we meet it? Here, and here. Great. Okay. What would you do differently next time so you get closer or meeting the standard? Oh, I'd probably do this and this. Great. Do that next time. I gave no feedback at all to that person. They worked it through themselves, but we understood the standard, right? You have to set the standard. And that's, you mentioned earlier, it's simple, but not easy. Figuring out the standards for things is hard because you really have to think and reflect and as I said, sort of look at the science and say, what is the best way to do this? And let's make sure we set that for our folks.
You bring up a really interesting point. And I'm on this soapbox, which is really a marketing soapbox, but it's applicable to here, which is the features, benefits, or what problems are you solving?
Mm-hmm.
Is that when we give feedback, we're often talking about the stuff, not about what we want for an outcome. So when I ask people to write a job description, which I also hate, I say, don't write down all the stuff you want people to do. Write down 3 to 5 things which are success factors to this job. If these things happen, you're successful in your job. Do you really care what of the 150 little things that get you there matter that much?
And everyone creates their own path, right? One of my favorite questions is, what's the ideal outcome? Right? Yeah. Someone says, "I'll do this and this." Okay, describe for me the ideal outcome. Just imagine everything goes as wonderfully as possible. What is that? Write that down. Tell me what that is. Then let's figure out how to do that. What would we need to do? Leveraging strengths and assets, et cetera, to do that. That's a lot easier than saying, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and with the implied outcome is this. Who knows, right? And I might not know them very well. So
you also brought something else up, which I think is really important. Yeah. And I just want to make sure our audience gets this because it's a really big deal. I didn't even realize if you knew you did this. You just described what I call the Socratic Method of management.
Yeah.
And the Socratic Method of management, very simply, is tell, ask. And you did a beautiful job of explaining how a great manager is helping someone become much better and coaching them because they're a thinking partner or asking questions. They're not sitting there telling somebody what to do. So I don't know if you even realize you were doing that, but it's an incredibly important factor if you want to build a good business.
Yeah. Yeah, but you have to dig the well before they're thirsty, right? If you have to do that work ahead of time to understand the standards so you can ask the right questions as opposed to having to tell people what to do. It's just easier. We like telling. We love giving advice. It's a human trait. We love to. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel good about ourselves. It makes us feel like we're helping other people. But it isn't always, and it's actually rarely the first thing you should be doing. There are times when you have to tell people what to do. Right? The building's on fire. It's a critical situation. You just got to say, run that way. Absolutely. But that's usually the rare occasion, especially in running a business. There's very few existential things going on in a business on a daily basis. So I think those are examples of conventional wisdom, right? Conventional wisdom is that, this is what everybody does, so it must be true. And if we agree with the stats that I said at the front, then conventional wisdom probably isn't the first thing we should try to figure out. Let's figure out where is success, how are businesses successful, and let's try to find out ways to apply that to our own business. What are the principles that we can apply to our business, and then figure out how to put the methods and approaches and processes and systems into our business so we're meeting those. And that's what I'm focusing the last chapter of my life on, as I want to teach as many people that kind of stuff, because I think there are so many businesses that go out of business or struggle for completely preventable reasons. Yeah.
So the question comes in, how open do you see business owners are to these ideas?
Oh, not much at all.
So there lies the problem.
Exactly. So that's what I do is I don't try to convince anybody of anything anymore. I'm a 30-year sales guy. I don't sell my services to anyone. I pick my clients and they pick me. I'm looking for a humble learner who is comfortable challenging the status quo.
Yep.
That's my client. I don't care how big you are. I don't care what industry you're in. As long as you have those traits, I have a chance to be able to help you. If you think you need to be the shall answer man, or there's command and control that you think is really important in your business, I'm probably not the guy for you. And I've fired or not brought on as many clients as I've brought on because of those.
If you want to be a values-led business, you're going to have a lot more fun, make a lot more money, and your business is going to be much easier than if you try to be all things to all people.
Exactly. So do you want me to get back to the original question? I know we've sort of gone off on a really cool tangent, but we can move on, but I'm happy to sort of give you my three.
I wanted to go back to something which I think is another. I'm off on tangents, I think, with you today because you have so many interesting tangents for me to run at. But the gap between what science knows and what business does.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of behavioral economics.
Awesome.
And behavioral economics sort of debunks the belief of homo economists that we are rational actors.
Yep.
And we're not rational actors. So I'm not even sure why we would think that businesses would follow science because that requires a rational actor.
Yep.
So how do you get around that?
Yeah. So by the way, I completely agree with you. And if you're familiar with, who Chris Voss is, the author of Never Split the Difference?
Sure.
Right. He's got this great saying, which he says, all humans should accept that we are crazy, irrational, impulsive, emotionally driven animals where raw intelligence and mathematical logic are of little help in the fraught, shifting interplay between two or more people. And he was one of the top FBI negotiators in the world. Yeah. So what he did, he actually applied science to his negotiation style, where other people provided conventional wisdom, which is, you must engage with them and you should only get and give, right? If you want something, you got to get something. And your job was to manipulate them to a certain place. And he said, that doesn't work. He says, people, if you can have people help you to solve your own problem, even though they're working they think they're against you, they are eager to help you. And he put them in a position where they would help him get out of the situation they were in.
Yes.
And so I call that's something called neuroleadership. So people are the foundation and the structure of a business. The inside of the business is strategy, execution, and cash, right? And those two things, first two things drive the third thing. And so what's interesting is, even though we are irrational, etc., we are predictably irrational. Dan Ariely has written many, many books about how you can predict the irrationality of people. That's science, right? If there's predictability in it, and you can have the same outcome in different ways. So if you understand that you should lead with the brain and mind as a business, then that's one way of applying science. And the example I love to give is, let's say you're in a meeting, you and I are in a meeting, and you're running the meeting and I'm your boss. And the meeting ends, and what I do is I say, hey, Josh, that was a pretty good meeting, but I'd like you to follow me back to my office. I'd like to tell you a few things about it. Right? So you follow me, and on the way, you're saying, what the hell did I do wrong?
Yeah.
What are people going to think about me? Because, not everybody had left. All right, if I did something wrong, what could happen? Could I lose my job? If I lost my job, what's going to happen? I can't send the kids to school. We're going to move to this new place. We're going to go on the vacation. So by the time I get to my office, which is a status symbol, and I sit behind my desk, which is another status symbol, I have put you in threat mode. And no matter what I say, positive or negative, you're not really listening to me because your body is saying, leave, run. You might be sweating a little. Your heart rate might be up a little bit because your body's saying, go. Because its just job is to protect you. And we don't really understand the difference between a social threat and a physical threat. Our brain doesn't very well. So here's what I would teach someone is, I could do the same thing. And I would say, Josh, here's the deal. I could sit next to you and say, that was a pretty good meeting. What I'd like to do is, because, one of our values is Kaizen, continuous improvement. Let's keep getting better. I would like to have you put on our calendars a meeting in the next few days. And I'd like you to come to that meeting with this: 3 things that you thought went really, really well in the meeting and we should keep doing or improve and keep doing more of. 1 or 2 things that didn't go so well in the meeting, And I'll do the same thing. And I want you and I to meet for as long as it takes until you and I agree that this is the best possible meeting we could have. That's the same thing, but it's applying science, which is you're no longer in threat mode because there's no status issues. There's certainty. You know what I'm looking for. There's autonomy. I'm telling you that you're the one who's sort of in charge of making this thing happen. I'm not putting you in the out group, which I did earlier. And it seems relatively fair. That's called SCARF, which is a Neuroleadership Institute thing, which allows us to move more towards reward and less to threat. That's science.
Can you give us a definition of what neuroleadership is?
Yeah, lead with the brain in mind. Make the things that you do as brain friendly as possible.
Okay.
Really it.
Does that fit in with neurolinguistic programming, or is this a whole separate thing altogether?
Yeah. Neurolinguistic programming is sort of a grab bag of stuff. It has some things in it which are pretty good. Yeah. But a lot of it is based upon pseudoscience, because I looked into neurolinguistic programming about 10 years ago, and it's not the same. It has some really good stuff, and a lot of my friends are doing it. Perspective taking is something. Chunking up and chunking down is something that's also in neuroscience. Why I move more towards Neuroleadership Institute is they're not trying to sell books. Like the folks who started NLP are two guys who wanted to sell a bunch of books. They are not neuroscientists. They're
actually linguistics guys.
Yeah, and they observed interactions between psychologists and other people, and then made extrapolations from there. And some of them are right, and some of them are not right. So I usually try to steer people away from NLP and move them more towards something with NLI, which is how do we make the world that we're in professional world more brain friendly? What is the science that supports that? So feedback is one of them, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is another. The SCARF model, how do people learn? Like the brain learns in a different way than we were ever taught. I mean, you and I are generally of the same cohort, so to speak, and we were sat in a classroom and we were probably told what to learn and spit it back a few weeks later. That's not how the brain learns. The brain learns in a completely different way. So that's the kind of stuff that I mean when I talk about science.
So one of the things I see, especially blue-collar business owners, they don't necessarily want easy, but they want simple.
Yeah.
And neuroscience brain stuff sounds not simple. So how do you make it? I mean, and this has been my experience with business owners in all sorts of different businesses. If it's hard for them to get their arms around, they just don't even try.
Of course, yeah.
So how do you make this really complicated stuff, and it is complicated, simple so they can understand it and then want to use it?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. One of the things that I do is I do this thing that I call the 311 exercise, which is I do at the beginning of every client interaction. And I have everyone go around and they have to write 3 things about everyone else in the room that they bring to the team that makes the team better. And then they do one thing that they detract from the team. And then one thing that they feel themselves, if they did more of, less of, whatever, would make the team even better. So it's the 311. This is what I call 311. And then about 3 or 4 months later, and they all say that out loud to each other. And they actually have to just say thank you. You have to stand before pandemic and people were with each other physically, they'd write them on stickies and then they would hand the stickies to the person and the person would accept the stickies and say, thank you. That's all they could say. Yep. And at the end, they get to pick one of the things that they're going to work on, either more of, less of, whatever. And then 3 or 4 months later, we check back in. And I have everyone go around and say, here's what I picked and here's how I think I did. And then everyone gets to give them their reaction. But I give them rules, and these are brain-friendly rules. One is, before you say anything, you have to sincerely acknowledge and appreciate what the person did. If you can. If you can't, then don't say anything. But that's one. So why that is, and I explain, I say, because when you do that, you actually send 3 to 4 chemicals in their brain. Endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. These are good chemicals. This actually brings you closer together just by doing that, because you're acknowledging that their effort. The second thing is, what I want you to do before you give any feedback or advice or whatever, you have to ask clarifying questions. So you might be like, Josh, it was something about your phone and you didn't want to use your phone as much. And I would say, I might say, So I understand that you decided to put it in your drawer. How did that work? Did you turn notifications off? What were the things that you did to make sure that you weren't distracted by your phone, as opposed to saying, what we want to do is say, what you could do, Josh, you could have done this. You could have stuck it in a drawer and turned off notifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a completely different thing. And then lastly, if you must give feedback, I say, if you absolutely have to, then you have to get verbal permission. Because again, verbal permission bypasses the lizard part of our brain, which says new is bad.
Yeah.
And at least it gives a chance that whatever you say next is more likely to be received. That's just a really simple way to say, that's all brain stuff. That's all neuroscience, but it's very practical. That's what I do.
I've got a curiosity question, because it fits in with a question I ask at the beginning of almost every workshop I ever run myself, which is, how many of the people that you do this exercise with choose a negative thing to work on versus how many things choose a strength they want to work on?
So I'm actually going to answer a little differently. More than half pick the thing that they chose for themselves. So if you're in a group of 5 or 6 people, you're getting 15, 18, 20 things, and half of them always pick the thing that's themselves.
Okay, that's interesting.
Because they came up with it. Most people fix a weakness.
Yeah, unless they own the business, then they're going to fix the strength.
I can't go back in the catalog of my memory and tell you yes or no. But
I've asked this question in front of hundreds and hundreds of people in workshops I've done. And it's almost universal. If you're an employee, you're going to fix weaknesses. And if you're a business owner, you're going to fix strengths. You're going to work on strengths. And I actually have a theory behind this.
Yep.
My theory is business owners control their destiny, so they get to choose what they're going to work on. Employees don't. So they think they have to choose what the boss wants them to make better, which is the weaknesses the boss always talks about. So if we as bosses talk more about strengths and ask people how they can improve them, we can shift that mindset with our employees also.
Agreed. Yeah. I'm a huge strengths. I'm a Marcus Buckingham fan, right? Just
go
with strengths first.
Yeah. I mean, I would rather be world-class than mediocre. That's sort of my way of wise guy is saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd rather succeed than not fail.
Yes. It's something that they share.
Yeah.
Bill, unfortunately, we are out of time, believe it or not.
Wow. Okay.
It goes by quickly. So you're an interesting guy. You have lots of interesting things to say. So I'm going to bet that people listening to this podcast would love to find you. So how would they go about doing that?
The best is the URL that you have there on the screen, catalystgrowthadvisor.com. All my contact info is there. My book is on my website. You can actually download it for free if you want a PDF, or you can go to Amazon or Audible and do it there. You can book time with me. I have a Calendly link on there. So that's the best place to find me. And I have 120 some odd blog posts I've written over the last 3 or 4 years. Very simple, practical, actionable things. They're 1 to 2 minute reads, basically, and give you something to do. And the book itself is a do-it-yourself book. It has a page on the website that has 25 different exercises that you can use as you go through the book itself as well.
Cool. And for those who didn't catch the URL, is catalystgrowthadvisors.com. So, Bill, thanks a lot. And I have 2 things I would like you folks to do. The first one is really important and really easy to do, is that you're listening to this podcast, unless you're watching it on YouTube or Facebook. And even there, you could go and do this. But go to wherever you listen to podcasts, and please, 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 please give us an honest rating and review. If you love it, tell me you love it. If you hate it, tell us you hate it. Either one's fine, as long as you review it. And the second thing is, I put together this thing years and years ago, which is a kind of an interesting little thing. I call it the periodic table of business elements. You probably remember the periodic table from chemistry when you were in high school or maybe even college. Well, we have a periodic table for if you own a business, and it's really easy to get. You just go to www.stage2planning.com/periodic. That's www.stage2planning.com/periodic. And this is Josh Patrick. You're with Bill Flynn. We're at Cracking the Cashflow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.